Hey guys, this video is going to be about the 5 civilized tribes owning Negro slaves. I'm going to say this again. This video is going to be about the 5 civilized tribes owning Negro slaves. So, the reason this video is important is because there have been many people that keep trying to say that Native Americans were held captive by European enslavement when the Europeans arrived. However, it does not change the fact that there was Negroes owned by Native Americans, specifically the 5 civilized tribes. So like I said, right? We already have videos of what the slaves to the Native Americans or Negroes look like. We've already showed you pictures of how we compare it to the Khoisan. Right? If you look Khoisan, you're most likely descendant of a freedman. Or got that Afro-Asian DNA like I showed. Right? You're most likely a freedman. Okay, but let's get back to the point. So, let's get to the first point. There was Native American. So Grove, there was Native American slavery. I heard that they took Native Americans captive, and that's why we can't believe that Native Americans never enslaved anybody. Well, what you have to understand is that's one part of history. You're not talking about the other part of history where that there were Native Americans, specifically the 5 civilized tribes that owned Negroes or Negro slaves. Now we're going to talk about the part that these people are talking about, that the Native Americans became slaves when Europeans arrived to the Americas. Let's get to it. Slavery among Native Americans in the United States includes slavery by an enslavement of Native Americans roughly within what is currently the United States of America. Tribal territories and the slave trade range over present-day borders. Some Native American tribes held war captives as slaves prior to and during European colonization. What that means is, right, the first tribes that interacted with Native Americans, right, they already had slaves through war. Okay? Slavery just didn't just come to America. It was already happening in America. All right? I mean, indigenous America. Some Native Americans were captured and sold by others into slavery to Europeans. Let me read this again. Some Native Americans were captured and sold by others into slavery to Europeans. So some other Native American tribes defeated and beat up and brutalized one each other and then sold their descendants into slavery. Remember, these are just Native American tribes, not the 5 civilized tribes. Just other tribes. No black, no white, just Native American tribes. While others were captured and sold by Europeans themselves. In the late 18th and 19th centuries, a small number of tribes, let me say this again, a small number of tribes, such as the 5 so-called civilized tribes, began increasing their holding of African American slaves. Now remember, they weren't called African American before. They were called Negro before. Negro, not African American. Because anybody could be called African American today. A person from Ghana could be called African American, being born on American soil, who has Ghanaian parents. A Jamaican can be called African American from coming to the Caribbean and associating himself as an African American when he's Caribbean. So I'm saying anybody can be African American today. European contact greatly influenced slavery as it existed among pre-contact Native Americans, particularly in scale, as they raided other tribes to capture for sales to Europeans. They fell into destructive wars among themselves against Europeans. Like I said, they already had slaves when they came over here, but they weren't you. They were their own tribes. Let's go down. We're going to read a little bit of this, and then we're going to get to the other one. Many Native American tribes practiced some form of slavery before the European introduction of African slavery into North America. All right? And I'm going to read the truth way. Many Hamite Indians, Hamite Canaanite, or my bad, many Hamite Egyptian Indians, right? Tribes enslaved people before the black Shemite Europeans or Edomite Europeans showed them that they can enslave white Hamite, Japheth, African slaves, and Judean Israelite Negro slaves. I'm going to read this again. Hamite Native American tribes had slavery to their own people and other to their own people before the black Edomite Europeans showed them another form of slavery that had Japhethite, Hamite, white African slaves from Africa and Negro Judean Israelite slaves from Africa to America. All right. The Haida, and if you don't understand, go watch Lex Will, go watch Fabrice Must Know, and go watch my old videos. If you can't, sorry, but I already repeated it twice. The Haida and the Tlingit peoples, and we're gonna go ahead. My bad, I got hiccups. The Haida are an indigenous, right? And you see that? That's a Haida woman. Looks nothing like a Negro. That's a Hamite. Alright, this is what she looks like. You type in Cham people. That's what she looks like. That's where's that picture? That's what she looks like. She don't look nothing like a Negro. We type Fijian woman. Let's put the afro. Sorry. I already saw one. Use her. She looks nothing. This Hamite looks nothing like this Shemite Negro. She looks like her. Probably darker in this photo. Let's get back. The Tlingit people. Let's do another one. Tlingit. Yes, he has a beard, sort of, but Hamites can grow beards too. Can't we Google Genghis Khan? Look at this. They look like her. They don't look like her. A Negro. Negroes. So they're not Negro either. Peoples who lived along the southeastern Alaskan coast were traditionally known as fierce warriors and slave traders, raiding as far as California. Slavery was hereditary after slaves were taken as prisoners of war. Among some Pacific Northwest tribes, and about a quarter of the population were slaves. Other slave-owning tribes of North America, for example, Comanche of Texas, Creek of Georgia, the fishing societies such as the Yurok that lived along the coast, which is now Alaska to California. Right? So now we're going to get to European enslavement of Native Americans. Now, this is important. All right? Because we got to differentiate this. When Europeans arrived as colonists in North America. We word that when black Edomite Europeans arrived as colonists in North America, Native Americans changed their practice of slavery dramatically. Hamite Indians changed their perception of slavery a lot. Native Americans began selling war captives to Europeans rather than integrating them into their own societies as some done before. Hamite Indians began selling war slaves to black Edomite Europeans rather than integrating them into their own societies as they had done before. This is where a lot of your black Indian people saying, I got Navajo in me, I got Cheyenne, Pawnee. And they don't understand their black European ancestor could have taken a slave captive and mixed with them, and that's how they have Indian in them. They don't even talk about that. All right. Native Americans were enslaved by the Spanish in Florida and Southwest under various legal tools. One tool was the economidia system. New economidas were allowed in the new laws of 1542, but old ones continued, and the 1542 restriction was revoked in 1545. As the demand for the labor in the West Indies grew with the cultivation of sugarcane, black Europeans exported Hamite Indians to sugarlands. Historian Alan Galley estimates that between 1670 and 1715, 24,000 to 51,000 captive Native Americans were exported through Carolina ports, of which more than half, 15,000 to 30,000, were brought from then Spanish Florida. These numbers were more than the number of Africans imported to the Carolinas during the same period. All right, remember he said Native Americans, right? So, we're gonna skip these parts. We really got to read these parts right here. But British settlers, especially those in the southern colonies, purchased or captured Native Americans to use as a forced labor in cultivating tobacco, rice, and indigo. Accurate records of the number of slaves do not exist. Slavery in colonial America became a caste of people who were foreign to English colonies. Native American Africans who were predominantly non-Christian. The Virginia Assembly defined some terms of slavery in 1705. Right? Okay. For some reason, it's only going to say the Yamasee. Right? It's not going to say all the other Native Americans that were put in slavery. I have no idea, and I want to make sure we differentiate this. All right. So we're gonna go here. What Native American tribes were enslaved by Europeans? Europeans colonists enslaved numerous Native American tribes across North America, particularly in Southeast and New England, with estimates suggesting tens of thousands were enslaved between 1492 and 1880. Major tribes targeted included the Tamaqua, Apache, Yamasee, Tuscarora, Wando, Kiowa, Pawnee, and other Apache and Comanche groups. Okay. Now, since I showed this, right? Now we're going to show what Native American tribes owned black slaves. What Native American tribes owned Negro slaves? The 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole, were the primary Native American nations that owned African American, really Negro, they just say that today, slaves, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries. These nations adopted chattel slavery, similar to white settlers. Not white settlers, black settlers. Held thousands of people in bondage in the Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, and sided with the Confederacy. Alright? And this here, I'm going to show you why it's important. Key tribes Cherokee held approximately 2,501, 11 slaves in 1860. Choctaw held roughly 2,349 slaves in 1860. Creek Muskogee held about 1,532 slaves in 1860. Chickasaw held approximately 975 slaves in 1860, with the highest percentage of the population, 18% owned slaves. Seminole, many owned slaves, while others adopted runaway slaves, leading to a unique blended community. Alright. Adoption of slavery. These tribes, largely in the Southeast, adopted slavery as part of their efforts to assimilate European cultural values, including owning plantations and engaging in agriculture. The Civil War. Because these nations were in Indian Territory outside the direct jurisdiction of the United States, the 13th Amendment did not initially free the slaves they held. Post-war emancipation. Treaties in 1866 formally required the tribes to emancipate their slaves, who became known as freedmen. Other instances, while the 5 tribes were the largest slave holders, other indigenous groups, including the Pawnee and Klamath, and the groups in the Pacific Northwest like the Haida and Tingling, had different traditions of holding captives. Alright? So remember, they just said the Civil War was not for the the Indian freedmen. Right? So in 1865, slaves to Indians didn't get free. They got free until 1866. Okay? Let me show you why this is important. Okay. Let me show you why this is important. Don Cheadle, Native American slavery.
What are you most eager to learn about your family?
I don't know, everything. All of the little stories are amazing, are fascinating.
Actor Don Cheadle has never heard anything about his ancestors who lived through the aftermath of slavery. So we searched for clues about his father's side of the family. The paper trail that we uncovered confounded our expectations. Unlike most African Americans who were freed by the end of the Civil War, your ancestors weren't.
They couldn't get it right.
Let's hear that again.
Unlike most African Americans who were freed by the end of the Civil War, your ancestors weren't.
They couldn't get it right.
Let's keep it.
Well, it just stuck to it.
Oh, I forgot. I gotta do this right quick because agents and Hayden ass ninjas be watching. So we gotta make sure these
fair use
Hayden ass ninjas and agents don't take down or copyright this video.
Potty did get it right, but it wasn't your ancestors, it was the people who own them. Take a look at this.
Chickasaw Nation Freedmen Roll.
This document is an official enrollment card for the Chickasaw Freedmen, the former slaves owned by the Chickasaw Nation.
Owned by the Chickasaw Nation.
Owned by the Chickasaw Nation. Your ancestors were enslaved by Native Americans. Here's your great-great-grandmother, Mary Kemp, her 11 children, including Bill Cheadle, your great-grandfather, William. And you can see William's father, Henderson, or Hance Cheadle. You are one of the few African Americans who was not enslaved by white people.
He said one of the few. So all of us, like we learned in school, right? They said we were owned by European white people, right? But there's no evidence of someone finding that their ancestor was owned by a white person or a European. No evidence. But there is evidence of black people, of people finding that their ancestor was owned by a Cherokee, a Chickasaw, or a Native American through a Freedmen rule. And we just read, remember we just heard?
Your ancestors were enslaved by Native Americans. Here's your great-great...
Right? So remember, his ancestors was owned by one of these tribes. And his ancestors didn't get free until 1866, which we're taught to celebrate Juneteenth, right? We're taught to celebrate Juneteenth, 1865. However, the people who got freed weren't the people owned by Native Americans. The people who got freed during this time were white people, black indentured servants, or any other type of indentured servant. They got freed, but not the Native Americans the black people, Negroes that were owned by the Native Americans. And let me tell you why this is important.
Great-grandmother, Mary Kemp.
That's mind blowing. With the slavery thing, as long as they could.
That's right. They said, "Come and get them."
Yeah, you gotta take my.
Right. So remember, who was calling me, bro? Oh my gosh. But yeah, so remember, Henry Louis Gates just showed him a freedman rule, right? He showed him a freedman rule. So Don Cheadle, if he could, right? He could go to court, Supreme Court, and tell the U.S. government that this nation owes him reparations. And he could actually fight to get it. And I'm talking to the Negro, that were owned by Native Americans. These other black people that be talking about that their ancestors were owned by white people, they cannot go to court and prove anything. Because it never happened. The opposite happened. Let me show you the opposite. White cargo. White cargo. Right? This is white people were slaves in America, not black. So, and I'm gonna show you this right quick. Black Choctaws rolls. Sir. Oops. Yeah. Liz, I think it's. Excuse me. So I looked up this thing. Black Choctaw. This list of surnames represents the names of the freedmen who were adopted through the Dawes Commission between 1898 and 1916. Note that many of these names appear in other Indian nation lists, and their appearance here does not provide of black Indian ancestry. Right? In addition to these items, it's recommended that the researcher obtain as much oral history as possible on the family, and then locate the Dawes records on the family, including the names of the ancestors on the enrollment cards and other pertinent records, like Ancestry.com, right? So you got all these names of Native American surnames that were owned. Even my last name there, Tyson, right? So I'm still trying to look at my genealogy, but yeah, like your name could, if your name is on here, there's a chance you can go on Ancestry or MyHeritage, look up your genealogy, go find your ancestor, and you should go find a freedman roll if you can find one. If that's proof that your ancestor was owned by a Native American or that you were a slave. But if you cannot find a freedman roll, you were never a slave. Okay? So right now, I have no evidence that I'm a slave. So I'm not a slave. Right now, I'm classified as a black European until I find some evidence that I was owned by, a Native American. I was never a slave in America. All right, just like other people. Don Cheadle, he found a freedman role, so he's an actual black person that found evidence. YouTuber Lex Will, I'm just naming people that I know. YouTuber Lex Will, he found his ancestry. He found that Native Americans owned his ancestors. The Choctaw Nation, like his last name in here, not his first name, but his last name Williams. So I'm just trying to tell y'all, if you say you're a slave, you got to go to Ancestry and find that Cherokee Freedman or that Choctaw or that Native American Freedman role. If you don't, you were never a slave. And if you can't find one, shut the fuck up. You were never a slave. All right? You were a colonist, an indentured servant, or maybe a slave owner. Just go do your genealogy. All right? Remember, guys, white people got freed from the 13th Amendment and black indentured servants. And they were owned by black people. Native Americans owned Negro slaves, and they were freed 1866 or emancipated. So remember, let's do a recap. Let me just show you an example. Freedmen card. All right. So when you go to ancestry.com or MyHeritage, you're supposed to go find a roll like this of your ancestor either being owned by a Cherokee, Seminole, or Chickasaw. It should look like this. And your ancestry should be on the roll. If you find this, you deserve reparations. You were an actual black slave, Negro slave in America. If you can't find this, you are not a slave. You were never a slave, okay? So, if you find this roll, you were an actual black slave to Native Americans in America. If you can't find this, you weren't never a slave. All right? And this is different from black Indian. All black Indian is just black Europeans that mixed with indigenous tribes. That's all they are. And if you didn't know, black Indians, when they were doing the Civil War, there were a lot of black Indian tribes that fought on the Confederate to help keep slavery of whites and other black indentured servants while you guys were enslaved. If you didn't know that. But yeah, y'all, that's it. And I'm out.